Senior U.S. Senator, for more on what we could expect from a Republican-controlled Congress this term. Loretta joins us again from Capitol Hill with more on her conversation with Senator Burr. Loretta, take it away.
Well, Tim, Senator Richard Burr is the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, obviously a very important post as we deal with terrorism overseas and all of these other issues. This is also going to be his last term in Congress. He said he is not going to be running for re-election again. We talked to him a little bit about starting this 115th Congress and what some of the big issues are on the horizon.
Well, I think it certainly changes the agenda. In the past 2 years, we've repealed in Congress the Affordable Care Act, only to see a president not sign it and that effort die. The American people spoke loud and clear in this election. They want to see change. So for the American people, if they're anxious to see change, they're going to find this to be exciting. If they're not anxious to see change, they're going to be miserable for the next 2 years, because I think that what we've got is a mandate from the American people to head in a new direction, to put the American people back to work, to get this economy going, and to make health care affordable for the American people again. And our challenge is to do that without leaving anybody behind, making sure that those who were impacted by an expansion in healthcare options actually get included in what the changes are. So it's a challenge I'm willing to accept, and at the end of the day, like every other piece of legislation, the American people will hold us responsible for what we do.
When we talk about that repeal of the Affordable Care Act, does that come simultaneous with a replacement for what would be next, or is it more important to get that repealed first and then start working on what a replacement would be?
Well, I think what we envision legislation that establishes the repeal over a period of time, which allows you to stand up a new competitive marketplace, private marketplace, to compete with that exchange market that the Affordable Care Act created. And as people see more attractive options at a cheaper price, they will move naturally from the public exchange to the private sector option. But these have to happen simultaneously. And over a period of 1, 2, or 3 years, we'll transition to a marketplace that's competitive, that has more options, and that we believe, I believe personally, will bring a much more affordable price to the premium of healthcare.
We have a president coming in that's certainly a different type of politician than we've seen. How do you expect this relationship to be between President Trump and Congress as far as getting things done, the things that you have on your agenda?
I think we should expect that he's a very decisive person. He mirrors everything we've seen in the employers we work for. Successful business people, men and women, black and white, across the country. They're decisive. They make business decisions, and they make decisions based upon short and medium and long term. And I think that's the mold that we've elected as president. So if you try to assess Donald Trump from the traditional Washington political mode, you're going to be stumped. You're going to be stymied. But if you look at it from a standpoint of what would a business person do, what would the boss of my company do, it's probably going to mirror exactly the management style of Donald Trump and the decisiveness of this White House.
One of the issues that the Senate will have to take on is his appointees for his members of cabinet. You had the Intelligence Committee, so you obviously have your finger on the pulse of what's going on across the world. When we look at some of his selections for Secretary of Defense, CIA Director, is he setting the right tone, do you believe, for who he's selecting for those roles?
I'm extremely comfortable with the picks that he's made up to this point. Again, you need to look at them in a new context. Rex Tillerson has the capabilities as Secretary of State to pick up the phone and talk to any leader in the world today, before he's actually confirmed as Secretary of State. He's got a tremendous head start on any other Secretary of State that's ever started in that role. And I think when you look at General Mattis at Department of Defense, somebody that can go in on day one, can begin to reform the Department of Defense while still building up the capabilities. Mike Pompeo at the CIA, a member of Congress, but a former Army Ranger, somebody who understands the impact of good intelligence. I think when you look down the line, though, many of them are non-traditional picks They bring to the table a quality that only somebody who goes through a thought process like Donald Trump could identify. And I think those qualities are absolutely crucial to the types of decisions and changes that are going to be made.
When you talk about non-traditional, one of the things Donald Trump's very non-traditional about is we live in this age of social media. Boy, does he embrace it. We see him tweeting all the time. Just yesterday, he tweeted at North Korea, or about North Korea and their nuclear program. Seeing tweets like that, that kind of openness in his opinion about things, does that concern you?
It would only concern me if it were more than the process. Donald Trump's not a process person. He's a results person. I'm less concerned with how we get there. I'm more concerned with where is it we're trying to get to. And I think his whole campaign was built on making America great. It's on results. It's on the final product. So I'm willing to give him as much latitude as he needs in process. And I think when you look at successful business people, sometimes it's difficult to figure out their negotiating skills, to figure out why they do certain things. But it's to win at the end of the day. And I think that he has used social media both in a way to win an election, and I think he will use social media in his negotiations as president to really throw off their game our opposition around the world. And at the end of the day, he will be judged just like Congress on the final product. And that's what the American people care about.
And I guess just finally, obviously one of the big issues that was talked about during this election cycle is the terrorism that we're seeing overseas. We saw more of it over the holiday season. President-elect Trump has said this is something he wants to take on head on. As we move forward into this new Congress, into the next couple of years, how do you see this moving forward?
Well, as long as terrorists have a safe haven to plan and to carry out attacks, then we will see more attacks like we saw in Turkey this past week, like we saw in France and Germany recently, and like we saw last year in the United States that may have been lone wolf and inspired by terrorism. Until we take seriously the elimination of the geography that they have to plan, to train, and to execute these attacks, then we can't expect anything drastically to change that's positive. Our intelligence community has grown tremendously over the last 16 years since 9/11. But I think they would be the first to tell you that you'll never get a complete picture of what could happen. The easiest way to eliminate terrorism is to eliminate the terrorist and their capability to plan, to train, and to execute. So where this administration wasn't willing to take on those safe havens in Syria, in Iraq, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, we've got to be willing as a leader in the world, not by ourselves, but with a coalition, to eliminate the safe havens that terrorists have to plan and execute attacks.
And Senator Burr echoed something we were hearing from a lot of folks here today, that he needs to get right down to work on his committee. Again, he is the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, so all of these terrorism issues and issues around the world are things that he will be dealing with as this Congress gets underway.
Times for North Carolina's senior U.S. Senator Loretta Beniti in Washington, D.C. tonight. Thank you so much for your hard work throughout